In the Word of God, in Genesis chapter 13, we read in verse 10 and following through 18, Lot was a man of the world. And it tells us Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plains of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. And because he was worldly, then Lot chose him all the plains of Jordan, and he journeyed east, and separated themselves, Abraham from Lot. Abram, in verse 12, dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom. Verse 13, but the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. But Abram, he didn't go towards Sodom. In verse 18, he removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and dwelt there, and built there an altar unto the Lord. The difference between a worldly Lot and a man like Abram that followed after God. In Genesis chapter 19, God deals with Lot and pulls him out of the city. His wife is still tied to that city, and she looks back, and we know the story of what happened to her. And she became a pillar of salt. But in verse 24 of Genesis chapter 19 says, then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. It was consumed. It was consumed because of the sin of sodomy. You read it from Genesis 13 all the way through 19, and you'll read about this. And that's why it is unnatural. We'll turn to Romans chapter 1 and see what God, it's unnatural. So let's turn to Romans chapter 1. In Romans chapter 1, God deals with the people, speaks about creation, and because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imagination, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Verse 24, wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. You figure out what he's talking about there. He just put himself out of the presidential election there in the United States, but he is of this group. This group has legality for marriage now, but God doesn't sanction it. It says in verse 25, who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Their desires are more important than God the Creator. Verse 26, for this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the man, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another. Men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error, which was meat. God judges this sin of sodomy. But ABC, which receives over $1 billion a year from the taxpayer, they had people, I guess they had a whole section. We'll show that to you in a video later. But the ABC presenter on ABC Breakfast, he said this, you might have been seen on social media. Nate was the subject of some disgusting, some disgraceful homophobic comments, which we think are just appalling. This is the presenter. ABC's News Breakfast host Michael Rowland has called out disgusting homophobic comments on live TV this morning. A presenter who's with an organization, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, over $1 billion of taxpayers' money, promoting sodomy and the sodomites. This is disgusting. This is against nature. And they ought to be called out, and the government ought to be taking away their funds. This is disgusting. This is as disgusting as abortion, and it should not be.
We're very proud of all of our colleagues who marched in that float, and
Who's that?
look who's there!